Alright, welcome to the beautiful Tulsa Botanic Garden. We're here on a field trip today to talk about the crosstimbers. Crosstimbers is one of the most exciting ecosystems in North America, and in my opinion, the coolest one in Oklahoma. It's not unique to Oklahoma, it kind of stretches from southern Kansas to northern Texas, but the core of it is right here in Oklahoma. The crosstimbers is essentially where the east meets the west, where the eastern hardwood forests transition into the western prairies. And it doesn't happen quickly. It's just starts as a forest and then kind of becomes a mosaic of forest and prairie and then becomes prairie. That mosaic part, that patchwork part of prairie and forest is called the crosstimbers. Home to tremendous biodiversity, including painted buntings, North America's most colorful bird, and up there singing for us. We'll listen for just a second. There he is. In any case, so the crazy part about this is how quickly it transitions from one to another. So here we have our prairie, and let's walk down and head towards the forest. How it got the name crosstimbers is a kind of a source of debate. Some people claim it was called the crosstimbers because it's so difficult to cross, due in a large part to the forest being really stunted and gnarled and totally choked with vines like we saw in one of the other episodes. Some people claim it's because the two most common plants here, post oak and blackjack oak, their leaves are shaped like crosses. All sorts of debate. There's a little finger of prairie that comes down west or east of Tulsa, and then obviously you have an all prairie once you get farther west. Some people say you come out of the eastern forests, you have to cross that little bit of prairie and then one more chunk of timbers, and some people claim that's why it's called crosstimbers. I don't know where I fall out on it. In any case, you're out in the prairie and it transitions in maybe 20 feet into the forest. And now you're in an eastern hardwood forest just that quickly. And a totally different set of adaptations plants are going to have. Here's your Oklahoma redbud, state tree. In the forest, it's going to be about 20 degrees cooler in here in the summer than it is 20 feet away out in the prairie. It's shady, so the plants have to put on big leaves to capture the sunlight. There's plenty of moisture, so they don't have to worry about losing the, oh, look at that, sorry. Here's a honey locust. Honey locust is a cool plant. We're going to talk about some of the challenges of surviving in Oklahoma if you're a tree, but in addition to all the other challenges trees face, they face animal challenges, and honey locust deals with that by growing thorns. Absolutely vicious plant, but every plant's going to try to survive out here, and this is how the honey locust protects itself. But in any case, when you're out in the prairie 20 feet that way, you've got to deal with much higher temperatures, you've got to deal with wind, and you've got high sunlight. All of those things are going to cause you to lose water quickly. Here in the forest, you don't have a lot of wind, you don't have a lot of light, but you have plenty of moisture, so you grow your leaves really big. There's a cherry tree. You grow your leaves really big to capture the sunlight. Here's a big tree, plum. And here's post oak. Post oak is our most common tree in the crosstimbers. Talking about biodiversity, we've got ticks, which if you're going to be in Oklahoma and be outside, you just have to learn how to deal with ticks. It's just the nature of the beast. There's two different strategies. You can get your long pants on, tuck your long pants into your socks, spray your legs with insect repellent, and try to keep them off that way. Or you can take my approach, which is to wear shorts, don't shave your legs, and then you can feel them crawling on you, because when they touch that hair, you can feel it. So I take the approach of let them crawl on me and just throw them off when I feel them. So there's post oak. This battle between forest and prairie that we see, it's a constant battle. This is a really dynamic forest. This area right here, 100 years ago, was prairie. And I know that because the post oak growing behind us, this oak had to have sprouted out in a prairie, because if you look at how bent and wide-reaching those limbs are, there had to be light. If you look at the other post oaks around here that grew up in a forest, they're straight. They shoot straight up because that's where their light is. But this one, when it was that age, was growing with its arms out because it was in a prairie. So right now, the forest is winning the battle. It's pushing that prairie back. And that's pretty much the story of what we have in the cross timbers, is really slow growing trees, but eventually they're going to win, because we're at about 40 inches of rain right now, and that's the magic number in North America. If you get 40 inches of rain a year, the forest wins and it will advance. And the farther west you go, the drier it gets. But being right on the edge of that, these trees grow really slowly. So if you look at these trees over here, this one is going to be 80 to 100 years old. They grow really slowly, and they have to deal with tremendous adversity as they're growing. So you can imagine, if that one's 100, this thing could possibly be over 200 years old as a tree. But in those 200 years, it's had to deal with everything. Oklahoma is an area of transitions. It's an area of transitions from precipitation. In the far western corner of Oklahoma, you get 16 inches of rain a year, and in the southeastern corner, you get 60 inches of rain a year. So we vary from 16 to 60, and that has a huge impact on the ecology. Great diversity of ecosystems. We get Rocky Mountain foothills, we get shortgrass prairie, we get tallgrass prairie, we get mesquite woodland, we get cross timbers, we get eastern forests, and then on southeastern Oklahoma, we get cypress swamps, alligators live in there. So we go from Rocky Mountain foothills to alligators in Oklahoma, and this is right where we transition from prairie to forest. And that difference is basically puts us at the crosshairs. Northern U.S. is cold and dry. Southern U.S. is colder. Southern U.S. is warmer. Western U.S. is drier. Eastern U.S. is wetter. And if you kind of take those four things, humid, not humid, cold, warm, Oklahoma is right in the middle. And what happens when you have warm, moist air coming up off the Gulf, coming into cold, dry air, you get storms. So over the 200 years, this guy's had to deal with huge numbers of thunderstorms. If you look at a map of the United States of where the most severe weather occurs, it's in Osage County. We are in Osage County right now. With that, where does the most hail occur? Right here in the United States. We're in the bullseye. So just the hail alone would be enough to beat up trees. But then you get your ice storms and your tornadoes. Where do the most tornadoes occur in the United States? Right here, bullseye. So just the extremes are challenging, but also the rain. It's not so much that we get 40 inches of rain a year. We just average that. I lived in Wisconsin for a while. Madison, Wisconsin gets less rain than we do here. They get about 37 inches of rain a year, but they consistently get it. It doesn't vary much every year to every year. And they get a lot of rain. They'll get 120 days of rain. We have more rain, but it comes in only 90 days of days that it rains. And that's because we're just a land of extremes. When it rains, it rains. We've had as much as 15 inches of rain in one 24-hour period in Oklahoma. So very intense, very extreme. And although we average 40, our wettest year has been 70 inches and our driest 23 inches. So these plants have to put up with so much, and the forest ends up stunted and gnarled. All right, there's the good news, is the forest is stunted and gnarled, so it's never been logged. In my backyard, kind of a riparian habitat, a creekside habitat, where the big walnuts and the elms and the oaks grow, that has been extensively logged in Oklahoma. But the cross timbers, because it's stunted, they can't use the lumber, so it's never been cut down. This is, believe it or not, the cross timbers, this crazy iconic eastern U.S. ecosystem of the eastern hardwood forests. This is the largest stretch of contiguous, solid eastern hardwood forest remaining in North America. That means that all of the biodiversity hasn't been cleared out, and we end up with this tremendously diverse, in terms of biodiversity, one of the best examples of eastern hardwood forest in America. Let's head down a little farther. A really important component of the cross timbers is it's all on shallow sandstone, including the prairie parts. So a lot of the prairie parts, the tall grass prairie that occurs here, you can't plow it, because you can't get a plow through this really shallow soil. So the prairie that exists here is the largest stretches of tall grass prairie remaining in North America, because it's never been tilled. The forest, most of the life is up there in the canopy, most of the biodiversity. In the prairie, most of the biodiversity is under the ground. Most of the biomass is actually underground in the prairie. Plants that are maybe this tall out in the prairie are going to have roots that might go down 12, 15 feet. But once you till that up and you plant corn or whatever, even if you want to go back and restore the native prairie at some point, you can't, because once you killed it all up, you killed all the fungi, you killed all the bacteria, you killed all the nematodes, all of the other animals or the other biodiversity that's in the forest. So here, right in central Oklahoma, we have the largest stretch of remaining original eastern hardwood forests growing right next to the largest stretches and patches of original undisturbed tallgrass prairie. Tallgrass prairie is the most endangered ecosystem in North America because it's so valuable as farmland, but we here have the largest undisturbed, so the two most iconic ecosystem in America, the western prairies and the eastern hardwood forests, we have the best examples of both right here, right next to each other. So it's underappreciated. Very few people understand what they're looking at. We're having a lot of suburban sprawl right now, so we're losing a lot of original cross timbers. But just appreciate when you see a tree like this, it's going to be 60, 80 years old. And we've got trees in the area at the Keystone Ancient Forest Preserve. I think they found trees over 400 years old. So whereas at first glance it may not be the most aesthetically impressive ecosystem, once you start to understand what it represents and what it holds, it's amazing. Every time I come out, I find insects that I've never seen before. I've been counting birds during the COVID crisis in my backyard, and just in my backyard I'm up to 54 species. So we're really fortunate to live in an area this biodiverse. Alright, we've made it through the forest part on the trail. It's a great trail, maybe 3/4 of a mile, beautiful, different every time that you come out here. So I encourage you guys to come up to the Tulsa Botanic Garden and enjoy the astonishingly cool gardens and the cool nature trail at some point. Here we are, popping back out into the prairie, and just that fast, I'm now in tall grass prairie, which doesn't look tall in the springtime. It will in the fall. This might get 6, 8, 10 feet tall with big blue stem. The 4 main species of grass that occur out here are big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, and switchgrass, which likes it a little bit more down in the wetter areas. The common trees are going to be the post oak we saw, blackjack oak, black hickory, elm, and probably ash as well in terms of common plants. We'll try to flip over a couple of rocks while we're out here to kind of get an idea of how many things are living underground. Here's a milkweed coming up, important because that's the food that monarchs feed on, and they're coming through. We have a number of monarchs in the backyard right now, and there's a good population out here. All right, always fun to flip rocks. Everything kind of hides, especially in the prairie. You never know what you're gonna find, like a tarantula. Not a dangerous animal, but absolutely beautiful, and just a good example of how much biodiversity is out in the prairie. Back out in the prairie, you can hear the wind coming, totally different, perfectly still in the forest, windy out here. This is a good spot to talk about how important fire is to the prairie ecosystem. It has to have fire. About 15 years ago, when we were putting in this trail, none of these trees were here. There was a small patch of maybe 10 trees over there. Now that patch is much larger, and all these cedars and elms have come in. This used to be prairie for about 300 yards all the way down to the creek. And that forest is just creeping in, and without fire, that's what's going to happen. And it's natural. Again, this part of Oklahoma gets a lot of storms, which if you look at a map of lightning in the United States, right here gets the most. So that lightning started prairie fires, and it knocks all the trees out and gives the advantage to the grasses, and the prairie reestablishes. It'll push the forest back a little bit. That fire will crawl through the forest and take out all the leaf litter and the jumbled fallen limbs and things, and actually be beneficial with the release of nutrients into the forest. So the forest needs fire as well, and in the absence of fire, the forest expands. And that's what we've been seeing in Oklahoma over the last 100 years, is repression of fire, and last 150 years, repression of fire, and the prairie is getting smaller and smaller. Keep in mind that Oklahoma, this area of Oklahoma, has the largest original tallgrass prairie, largest stretch of original tallgrass prairie in the U.S., and we're losing it by not managing it effectively with fire. And it's scary and it's challenging, but prescribed burns are really safe and done by professionals, and a neat opportunity to kind of maintain 2 of the really cool ecosystems in the crosstimbers.